All right, Greg. So we've made it to IP 13 now. We're up to
13.
13 now. This one. So
Magic 13.
yes, some people say it's unlucky, but I think in this case that's quite wrong.
Yeah,
Released November of 1984, I believe.
that
And
sounds about right.
Was this part of the sessions that became Tragic Figure, or was this something separate? Is this newer material? Was this recorded before or after Tragic Figure? Just want to know what the story was. I want answers.
Okay, we can do that. These all three tracks on this were recorded in the parking garages at UCLA, and so they were some of the earlier recordings that we did. A few of the recordings from those parking garages ended up on the Tragic Figures album, like the first part of Procession, and I think there's something else that there's a couple of other shorter snippets that got recorded in the parking garages. Zulu Zulu was something that Phil recorded at home. So there were a couple of little snippets like that he created on his own and then brought to the band. As I recall, he was like, this would be cool to put on the records. I said, okay, sure, why not?
Well, was that a cassette recorder, Bruce? Right? It wasn't like a reel-to-reel, right? Or even 4-track like you had.
You mean what Phil used?
Yeah.
Probably. I don't remember.
Rough, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he just like stuck a rhythm machine into his amp and turned the reverb up to 10 and put a microphone in front of it.
so Bruce, you were saying that this was recorded at the UCLA parking structure, right?
Yeah.
What equipment were you recording on?
I had a TAC 4-track reel-to-reel and a few microphones that I managed to cobble together. So yeah, and at first I was hoping to be able to record the whole album just on our own in the parking garages, but ultimately I ended up feeling like I didn't really have enough knowledge or ability to really do it right, and so that's why we went into Radio Tokyo.
Okay.
But ultimately, I think what happened is that as I was re-listening to some of those recordings, I realized that there was some really good stuff there that I didn't want to have disappear. Like that one. Well, all 3 tracks on this, I think, are really interesting versions of the songs. So
side 1 is Tragic Figure. I think it's this way. Tragic Figure.
yeah.
Letterpress label, right?
Yep, letterpress label with the hole through the head. Definitely a Tragic Figure there.
I wonder if Jeff had any thoughts about putting a hole through Bruce's head. Jeff, did you have?
No, Bruce has a fine head. I wouldn't want to do that.
And then, of course, on side 2, the Empty Quarter, which I have some questions, Jeff, about that for you. And then Ivory Coast, which is one of my all-time favorite Savage Republic songs. That song definitely still stands up. So, Jeff, on the Empty Quarter, I think you're credited as you and Mark writing that piece. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was just riffing on that, and Mark came in and
We had the tape rolling.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
So I think it was just like, we would have these bits and pieces of things that we would play around with, and I think that was just one of those occasions where it just kept going. So no big master plan, I have to admit, no one.
Right. So was it kind of like an off the cuff improv, kind of just jamming?
I think there was like snippets that we had played at other rehearsals, but never turned them into anything. So
Okay.
This was just a little bit more extended version of some things we'd played around with before.
Okay. And then on the Ivory Coast, I believe, Bruce, that's you're playing bass guitar on that, and then Jeff, you're doing the monotone guitar, right?
Yeah.
And the other two members, of course, were Mark Erskine on drums, and then Jackson Del Rey, Phil Drucker, and I think he's playing percussion on that Ivory Coast.
Yeah.
So was that
Yeah, he had some metal pipes that he was banging together, as kind of, as I recall. on that.
okay? Okay, so I would imagine that song began with that bass line because it's a pretty distinctive bass line. Yeah. So Bruce,
And-
you came up with that, I would imagine.
I believe actually that that may have been something that Phil came up with.
Okay.
And then I started playing it and embellished it a bit.
Okay.
I think the original idea for that was Phil's. I think.
Okay.
Pretty sure it was.
Yeah. It definitely has a Bruce feel to it on the recording.
I made it my own.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so Jeff, your parts on the monotone guitar, was it something that you were just feeling and riffing on that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I have to thank Bruce for coming, for introducing that idea of the monotone guitar. But I think, as he said last time, Bruce, you saw it at another show.
Glenn Branca,
Oh,
His-
that's right.
his
Yeah,
first West Coast or LA area appearance I went to, and
Yeah.
it just blew me away, the sounds that he was getting. So
yeah,
let's see what we can do with this.
right. So it's pretty easy to play because you don't have to, you don't have to make any chords. You just have to put your finger as a bridge over all the strings. And so, that's why it was pretty freewheeling, if you will. And I don't know. I didn't really think of Dick Dale or any of that. I never even ever associated that song with that, but I guess, it is kind of a industrial surf kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't know where that came from. I mean, I love Dick Dale, so maybe that's where it creeped in there, but I wasn't saying, well, this is going to be our industrial Dick Dale song or something like that. It came out.
Yeah.
Well, Mark had such a
Crawled out of
great,
your subconscious.
Mark had such a great surf beat going on that
Yeah,
song.
he did.
It fits perfectly. And I mean, Jeff, I've always been really impressed with what you created on that monotone guitar for that song. And it's interesting because I think about it, and I mean, every one of us had a different way of playing that guitar, just in terms of how we would play the strings, and I think that the fact that you played bass most of the time and that you were finger picking the bass, it's like you sort of attacked the strings of that guitar in a different way than I would have.
That's interesting.
And that whole ka-chunk thing, and just the way that your fingers would kind of go up and down the neck of the guitar. It was very cool. And of course, later versions of the band, I switched over to playing the guitar part and somebody else playing the bass.
Yeah, this recorded version is fantastic. Like I mentioned earlier, it's one of my favorite all-time Savage Republic recordings. The Ivory Coast is fantastic. The A side, Tragic Figure, which is a variation of the album title, Tragic Figures. So you got singular Tragic Figure here. Was that name attributed to the piece when you were putting the single together, or was it something that you had already titled that piece? It's pretty dissonant. There's some dissonant guitar going on that piece for sure.
I mean, it's something we sort of jammed around with, and it did get performed live a few times. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to think, it might have been the opening song that we played at our first gig we ever did at the Brave Dog. I'm trying to, but I think we might have opened the set with that. I'm not.
That sounds right. I was going to say Brave Dog with that. So.
Yeah. But it was definitely something that, Phil started just playing around with on the guitar, and we all sort of fell into place. And And yeah, I mean, that's me doing the screaming there. So it's just something I had to get out of me, I guess.
You were
Yeah.
the tragic figure.
I was, yeah.
Yeah, some of that shout therapy that Yoko Ono talks about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and Jeff was real good at that too, doing some of that. Yeah,
Yeah, well, the punk rock, just naturally kind of came out there.
yeah, yeah. Some great recordings there. So, any thoughts about putting the 3 songs on this and not just 2, or making it like a 4-song EP? How did you whittle it down to these 3 particular pieces?
I think it had to do with the length of the song "Tragic Figure." That we didn't want to. I wanted it to play well and not be too compressed. You get much more over 4 minutes of music on one side, and then you start losing fidelity. So
Yeah, and then I think Empty Quarter is only like a minute and a half or something like that.
yeah, it's a short piece, and then Ivory Coast is relatively short too. So it fit nicely, and I think it makes a good statement that way. You can really just focus on the Tragic Figure side, and then you've got some other taste treats on the other side.
Yeah, and of course ending very strong with Ivory Coast here. So
Yeah.
So this,
because that's such a raw version of it, and in some ways I almost wish I'd put that version on the album, but now we get 2 versions.
yeah,
I guess at the time I felt like it wasn't quite strong enough to go on the album, so we did another version in the studio.
okay, all right. Yeah, the single version is fantastic in my opinion. There's a rawness to it that
Yeah.
that I just absolutely love. And so can we talk about this block? So
Yeah.
I did a little bit of research on that, and can you talk about making this white and red bar?
Yeah, so I was trying to, because the cost of printing plates, when you get big printing plates, they can be kind of pricey. So I was trying to find some blocks of wood that were around the right height to go on the letterpress.
Okay.
And I did manage to find a big slab of wood that was maybe a little taller than type high, but I was able to work with it. And I cut a piece of it, and I just ran it through the table saw a number of times to cut the part. The white was the cut out parts of that, and then and basically it was like I flipped the block of wood over. So on the bottom side of the block of wood, it's solid. So I printed that first in the white, and then flipped it over and printed the red stripes on top of that. And that same block has been used a number of times on various projects. As a matter of fact, I used the same block I think I used it on the recent Africa Core Live at the Whiskey special edition CD.
Oh, wow.
I'm pretty sure it's the same block. Yeah. And then I made a set of greeting cards using that block too. So
wow. So that piece of wood has been around the block, so to speak, right?
It has.
Good one.
That was a stretch. But yeah, this looks fantastic, and it's in the Savage Impressions book you talk about doing that. And when we were talking with the members from NEEF, you were talking about what you did to that piece of wood. So it's very interesting, your approach to some of the printing and not using like the typical printing plates. Yeah.
And actually that block of wood that I used on NEEF was from the same block that I carved out with. It was just different parts of it that got cut up.
Nice.
So
Jeff,
because those two releases, this one and the NEEF, came out at the same time, and they came together because of Michael Shepard, who was one of my roommates, had gotten this deal with a pressing plant. And so he and I collaborated. We made both of those releases were co-releases, and they came out at the same time. So.
Yeah, I think it is noted. Yeah, the iridescence is on the back. Sorry, I got your signatures, but I got room right here for Jeff to sign one of these days.
Okay.
Oh,
when I
absolutely.
when I make it to the Midwest or something.
Or if I make it to California, right, exactly, I'd be happy to do that.
I would be hunting you down if that's the case. That's for sure. So I think I read that the NEAF release was earlier in the year. So you're saying they were released at the same time? I think I read it was like June
Oh,
1984, and this
you
was
could be right.
Yeah.
You're probably right.
I don't know.
But they were both sort of in production at the same time, kind of thing.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's just a matter of a couple months, if that's true. You never know with the internet, what's true and what's not. But
Or you never know what people's brains are remembering 40 years later.
exactly, exactly. And then you included this insert, which is I loved, as not knowing what was going on with the band. So I imagine you printed a few of these on a sheet and then they were cut to size. Is that how that worked?
No, they were printed one at a time.
Oh, one at a time, individually?
I didn't want to have to typeset that 3 times.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
Yeah. No, it's just, yeah. You set it up once and then stand there and feed them in to the press.
Okay, okay. And then I think before you said that the last step of the process is the numbering.
Yeah. Although, in this case, it very much could have been that I did the numbering at the same time.
Okay,
You lock it up in the chase.
okay. But as far as the cover, maybe with this numbering system, that might have been after the fact or the last part of it?
Yeah, it could have been. I don't remember at this point.
Okay, okay. So Jeff, I was wondering what your opinion was of the artwork when you saw it, that being a member of the band and Bruce is primarily.
Oh, yeah, I've always been blown away by, Bruce's art, and it's just such a pleasure to be, associated with somebody who took such time and drew on all his talents to make such great graphical materials. So it's just it was each album was a work of art, and it just I was just very happy to be associated with it. So thanks, Bruce.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
yeah.
For providing something great to be able to wrap with printing and design.
Jeff, were you shocked to see your image on the cover?
Not really, because that that image has been floating around between us for several years.
Okay.
So I guess now, so I wasn't shocked, and plus Bruce consulted me and Phil before putting it on there, so that was nice of him.
Very nice. So the other 2 members of the band didn't take exception to not being included?
No, I think Phil even I thought Phil preferred that one, Bruce. Wasn't that right?
Yeah, I don't really remember at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Bruce showed a bunch of different ones, and one of them featured Phil, and it just it was fine, but it just wasn't as cool looking.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, I don't know.
Yeah, this is a very, very cool image right here for sure. So,
Yeah.
Greg, were you gonna say something?
Nothing. I was just saying the symmetry of the design is so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great
Image.
So as far as these songs making it to CD, if I'm not mistaken, this was the first time when Mobilization released this CD box set, or at least one of the few times that.
Well, there were earlier CD versions. Fundamental Music put out a CD in the late 80s, I believe, that included, I'm pretty sure included these 3 tracks.
Okay.
And it got reissued in the early 90s as a co-release between IPR and a label called We Never Sleep out of Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
And I did a letterpress sleeve for that one.
Oh.
We used the same disc that Fundamental had released, and then I believe that the Mobilization is the same disc as well. It just different package.
Okay, okay. I might have to hunt down that other one, so.
You might. I might be able to help you with that too.
Thank you, I would appreciate that, yeah. All right, so I always have to find what Savage Impressions has to say, and it shows that there was 2 editions. So the first edition was 2000, I believe, Bruce, that you ran,
Yes.
and I imagine that that probably did fairly well to require a second run.
Yeah.
So by then, IPR, I think, was definitely gaining a lot of ground. I know at least down in my area, down in North San Diego County and Lose Records, which was my record store, the IPR name had gotten pretty prevalent, where most of the record store clerks were always talking about it, especially when I walked in the store. They're like, we have a new IPR release.
Nice.
So I imagine at this point that things were selling a little bit more than they had been when you first started. Was there a demand when the single came out?
Yeah. I think Tragic Figures took off pretty quickly, and we had to get into a second pressing of that towards the end of '82, and then there was another pressing of Tragic Figures in '83. So I think there was definitely a lot of interest in the band, and so this sort of filled a hole to be able to say, okay, here's something new from the band, even though it was older recordings. It's like, here's something else that people can have. And I think so. Yeah, this would have come out after the Film Noir 7-inch.
Okay.
So
when this release came out, Jeff, were you still a part of the band? Do you remember?
I don't think so. Bruce?
yeah, I don't think you were.
Yeah,
Because you left after the Mojave Exodus show in April of '83.
yeah.
So that was when Phil and Robert and Mark and I continued on, and then we had differences of opinion about the new material, and that's when the whole Savage Republic 17 Pygmies split happened. So when this came out, I was sort of in the process of trying to figure out, how to continue keep the band going. And so, an opportunity to release some older music kind of kept the band name in people's consciousness.
Yeah.
I figured out how to continue going with the band.
Perfect. So it definitely served a purpose, and that was totally the case for me, Bruce, when seeing a new release and not even realizing that it was older material, but it just seemed like the band was continuing to be active. So yeah, that totally worked out. I'm glad you mentioned the Mojave Exodus, since we've got Jeff here and we have a few minutes left. Jeff, can you talk about that experience and going out to the desert for that performance?
Yeah, I mean, it was spectacular. It's just, I was amazed that we were able to pull it off. So I still don't understand, Bruce, where the generators, did you supply those or were those supplied for us?
Stuart Sweezy, who put them together, I think it was the sound man brought the generators with him. So Stuart just had, hired him to bring generators and the sound equipment.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was amazing. It was not it just seemed like to me, like a spontaneous happening, where a bunch of people just decide they're gonna, drive out to the desert and have this live music. And so it was, quite a phenomenal experience. And, it's not to sound like an old gangster, but, I just kind of laugh at this, Coachella or, these things now. It's just like, so well planned, so well, orchestrated, that was not this. But it had a freshness and spontaneity to it that was, just really very, very enjoyable, and the setting was just, spectacular. So yeah, that was a really very, very cool experience.
pre-Burning Man too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Which now is something much different than when that started as well, too. So,
Yeah.
Greg, did you have any last questions before we wrap up?
I think that's pretty much it. Thank everybody for joining in.
All right, Bruce, Jeff, we really thank you for sharing. Was there any last thoughts that you guys had about this single before we close out? Looking back on it all these years later, next year will be the what 30th, 40th reunion or
40th anniversary.
40th
That
anniversary of this. Wow. Any last thoughts on this? Looking back on it almost 40 years later.
I'm amazed at what great sound Bruce got out of the equipment that he had at the time. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I listen back to those recordings and I think, wow, I just love how Mark's drums sound. And there was just something about those cheap microphones that I had in that parking garage that, was just like, yeah, magical.
And the natural ambiance, the natural
Yeah.
that you had.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and the energy that we as a group had. I mean, we were just so excited to be creating this music and experimenting and trying new things. And it's like, wow, do you hear that sound? It's it was good times.
Yeah. And yeah, that energy definitely comes across in these recordings. Last question. When you guys think about your version of the Savage Republic and starting off, do you think of the band as more of a live band or more of like a studio band? Because you guys had that energy on stage too, so.
Oh, I think of this more as a live band. I mean, it was much more about getting together and playing. I mean, yes, we wanted to document what we were doing, and there was something about the creation of these sounds sculptures in the studio, but the live experience, I think, was really what it was all about.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And yeah, Jeff, especially with the Africa Core release, the Savage Republic release, you can hear that with some of your banter with the audience that you were you were definitely a big part of the performance there.
Yeah, it was a very different energy live than on the album, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and some of the audience reactions, I would imagine.
Yeah, Jeff, you had some of your wasted youth buddies in the audience there at the whiskey that night. I remember that was.
There you go.
That was fun.
Well,
Good.
that being said, this is still a great recording to me, and these three songs are fantastic. I'm especially fond of the Ivory Coast, and that still holds up, as does the whole record. So thank you guys for putting this out, and thank you for talking to Greg and I today about this. And I'm gonna look for you, Jeff, if you make it out to the West Coast.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having us, and thanks so much for your interest. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. We're huge fans, and obviously Greg went on to play many of these songs, including the Ivory Coast, both bass and guitar, and with the band too. So he's
great.
Well familiar with these songs. So we appreciate it. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Okay, take care.
All right.